Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me, and thanks to Campkins Cameras and to Canon for inviting me for this for the Cambridge Photography Week. So we are in the UK, certainly on the verge, we hope, of opening up and the world going back to some sort of normality. Um, and that means weddings hopefully can start again, and portrait sessions and so on can start again. And even if you're not a professional photographer, um, this is hopefully some source of inspiration for you in terms of how to get creative with your lighting. So what I want to do today is share my approach, my ethos to photography and to lighting and to my stylistic approach, and how I work under pressure and in situ with various forms of lighting. And it's there's a lot of information, so hope you feel like sponges today. So we're going to be sharing lighting diagrams, we'll be sharing some behind the scenes videos, and let's just get cracking. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you can see me up in a little corner over here somewhere. So as you can see, I'm Sanjay Jogia. I'm an ambassador for Canon, and I've always used Canons all my life, but I'll come onto that story a little bit more before I actually get onto any of the stories and any of the information as far as the images and the behind the scenes are concerned. I want to show you a little behind the scenes video, well, a little introduction. So it's me introducing myself. I've always had three great passions in my life: photography, cars, and architecture. I've chosen to pursue photography. I'm Sanjay Jogia, and this is what I do. So, hope that was interesting and gave you a little idea of how I work and what I do. I've got a few people saying that you can't hear me, so I've just turned the volume up on this. Can everyone hear me now? Hopefully you can. Do let me know if this is any better. In the meantime, I'll continue. Okay, Roshni says you can hear me. That's great. This is the camera I actually grew up shooting with. It's my dad's old Canon AE1. Hopefully some of you have had the an experience with this camera. It was is really what I cut my teeth with, and yeah, I sort of taught myself photography with this camera as a typical kid. Sort of opened it up and had to play with it, took the lens off and opened up the back to see how the camera would work. And this is the thing that got me into it, and I still have this camera. So what I discovered as a child when it came to photography was I had complete creative freedom. I could do what I wanted, and other people didn't need to understand that, and that didn't matter because it was me expressing myself. It was me using my creativity to to do what I wanted. It was art. So I got playful with uh, the camera and shooting with film, and I learned how to um, sort of develop the my approach. And uh, my first ever wedding actually was not professionally, but it was my uncle's wedding in Sydney. And I taught myself my approach, my photojournalistic approach. And I was always very shy as a kid. And I used to walk around with the camera and essentially preset the settings. Because it was manual, it was completely manual, so I didn't even have autofocus. I would have to pre-focus and pre-expose and pre-compose and just be ready for the moment, essentially. And yeah, I could get away with that because I was shy, so I could hang back, and I was a child, and people didn't really pay attention to me. So I kind of learnt my photojournalistic skills in that sort of way with this very machine. But kind of fast forwarding, I won't say how many years, but let's just say a couple of decades. Um, I then discovered that the other challenges, certainly when it comes to weddings, is uh, the creative portraits, because with certainly the sort of weddings that we do, which are quite large, very long days, and very rich in color and texture and tradition and history, and certainly very rich stylistically. There was a big sort of demand and expectation for uh, portraits that looked like they were from a movie or from a fashion magazine. So it meant having to develop a style that allowed us to create consistency. So a consistent approach in terms of the photojournalistic images, which make up a huge volume, at least 95% of the images, and then the other 5% are the couple's portraits, which tend to be the kind of the hero shots, if you like. And these images, they are very difficult, because certainly with the photojournalistic images, the moment is being presented to you, and it's up to you as the artist to kind of respond to that, and um, you know shoot what you see, shoot what you feel. Whereas the couple's portraits are completely in your control. So in a sense, they're more difficult, and you have to create these in a very limited period of time, and meet the expectations of the clients and so on as well. So I would say my style is a consistent way of seeing things. That underpins the entire approach altogether for me. Um, but then also part of that is understanding that light is our paint, uh, and our style is the way we hold the brush, and our tools are the brushes. So remember, we're artists, and sort of growing up as well, I love drawing and painting. I actually qualified as an architect, so I used to sculpt, I used to build models, I used to draw, used to build 3D models in computers, so a bit of a geek as well. But that whole artistic, that creative element was, there with me from a young age. So, as it says in the video, I have sort of three big passions, and architecture is one of the ones that I actually managed to fulfill, I qualified in, and the photography is something I grew up with, and ended up just becoming part of my life. And the reason I grew up with it actually is because my father worked for Kodak for 35 years in the factory in Harrow, which is no longer there, unfortunately. But that left a mark, and that there was quite a lot of influence from that whole thing. And yeah, it stayed with me all the way through my architectural training, and it took over. At some point, even after I qualified as an architect, just I was more in love with photography than I was with the architectural, well, certainly the building industry. And the message here is follow your passions, follow your dreams, and follow your gut feeling, because that's more powerful than anything really, and it'll carry you all the way, through all the tough times, particularly now, especially with, we're in this pandemic. The photography industry has been very good to me. The photography business has been very good to me, and we're still here, and we're still here to serve our customers. So these are my brushes. These are my tools. This is sort of what I take to a wedding, believe it or not. Not everything. In fact, there's some things in here I can fit into the photograph. So there are things that I take to weddings that aren't in the picture, and then maybe some things I wouldn't necessarily take to a wedding. Let's talk about my approach, because we're 10 minutes in and I've got a lot to share with you. So I'll share an image like this. This is a wedding a photo of a wedding couple at the wedding venue, not too far from where I live in Harrow. It's a place called Moore Park Mansion, and many people, many of you guys may have actually been there and shot there and worked in this place. Now, they have a very cool style, very cool look and feel to them, the way they dress and who they are, their personalities, and I wanted to bring that out in a series of photographs. But what I want to share here is actually the approach, the thinking. Now, obviously, the environment appeals to my architectural sensitivities, let's say, and I didn't want to diminish that by sort of blasting the whole scene with unnecessary lighting. And remember, my inspirations come from movies and fashion, but particularly movies, because lighting tends to be very delicate and tends to be moving as well. So a lot of thought and care needs to go into that. So you've got to think like a director of photography here, on site, in situ at a wedding, which means thinking very carefully. We don't have a team the size of a movie set. They of a movie production. They have lots of people that will do lots of small jobs to keep things moving fluidly. So this is a real challenge, a real testament to all us wedding photographers out there. So the thinking is, I expose for the light that's in the space. So hopefully you can see my cursor here. All these little pools of light in the corner here, and underneath the gallery. These are all the practical lights that are in the venue itself. So I'm exposing for that, and then underexposing slightly, because I don't want it to compete with the key lighting, which is the lighting on them. So I've underexposed it probably by about 2/3, maybe a whole stop, because the hot spots where these are actually very hot, and I didn't mind darkening the rest of this down. So composing for complete symmetry, so we don't end up with strange distortions. Now, I use the 16-35 lens here, and if any of you guys have used 16-35, it's a great lens, but slightly unforgiving if your composition is off. So you'll end up with a lot of distortion. But once that's all composed, the camera's on a tripod in this particular case. I generally tend to do most of my photography handheld, even the portraits, but every now and then, particularly when it comes to an environmental shot like this or an architectural shot like this, it needs to be on a tripod so that you can control the composition, you can control the adjustments and have that consistency. So this is really just two lights actually. There's a light behind them, and you may just be able to see the little highlights on the door and the little separation, because it's the room behind them, the lights were off, it's completely dark. I didn't want them to blend into that darkness, so there's a light behind them which is giving that little rim of light and that little bit of detail there, a bit of separation. But the light on them is actually on a very tall stand, off to camera right, just on the corner of this, on the edge of the gallery here. So essentially that light would have come right to the edge of this frame, and it's snooted. So it's, for those of you who've never used a snoot, it's basically a cone that funnels light into one little pool. But because it's at such a distance, that pool of light's a little bit bigger, but it creates this lovely little circle, which sort of works with all the little circles of light that are around the rest of the room as well. And once this is set up, the lights I'm using here are big sort of Pro Photo flashes, Pro Photo B1s, which have a lot of power. And particularly in a dark space like this, it works very well, throwing that light across the space, modifying the light every single time, because controlling where the light comes from and controlling where the light falls is very important. And you want to shape this light so that you don't have unnecessary spill across the space. So if I hadn't put a snoot on there, that flash would have illuminated the entire room, and the hotspot would have been up here on the ceiling somewhere, which would have been brighter than the couple, which doesn't work because you want the eyes to be drawn to the couple. Um, and your eyes are actually drawn to highlights naturally. So you're looking at this picture of me, and there's a highlight back here somewhere behind the printer, and that's probably the brightest part of the scene. So my bad, I should have adjusted that down a little bit. But the point is, your eyes will be drawn to the brightest part, and it's important that the brightest part is generally the subject. So moving on a little bit, this is the same couple, essentially the same pose. All I've done is changed the lens. So I've gone from a 16 to 35 to a 70 to 200 so I can get a nice tight crop, because their pose was wonderful. The connection between them was so intimate, so passionate. I wanted to get that. So slight tweak of the pose, slight tweak of their expression, so that there's a bit of separation between them. There's a little bit of tension building up between their lips just before they kiss, and nothing else has changed. The light settings haven't changed. The camera settings haven't changed, and this is the setup. So a couple of there's a light behind them which is modified with a zoom reflector with a grid, and the one over here to camera right is snooted, and the camera on the tripod, and you can see the camera settings are identical apart from the lenses. I'll actually talk about camera settings a little later on. I won't go into too much detail, but there's a little bit of detail, but not too much. It's a little bit geeky, but it basically explains how you can control the balance between flash and ambient without messing around with light settings too much. Because the ambient light, say if it's daylight for example, you have no control over that unless you're God, because then you can turn the sun down, and none of us can do that. So you have to be able to adjust. You can adjust the flash obviously, but then you can adjust the separation between the two. By that I mean the balance between the daylight and the flash, whether you want the image to look more ambient with a little kiss of light, or if you want it to look more flashed and almost like it's shot at night, or if you want a balance that's a little bit more dynamic. So I'll share that with you a bit later on. Here's another example of a bride. This is a Sikh wedding, actually, a Sikh bride, and with Sikh weddings the bride has to wait in a waiting room before she can make her entrance. So she's already at the temple, the Gurdwara, and it's usually quite a boring, tense moment for her because she's sitting around waiting. Sort of her nerves are building up. So I like to use this time to actually just defuse the nerves a little bit, and take the opportunity to create some beautiful portraits. So the waiting room in this case was actually just a tiny little box of a room with one tiny little window up here and some blinds, which is great. The blinds are great because it means I can direct the light, and I actually I can get lovely soft light from there. So I've switched off all the lights in the room. I always turn off the practical lighting because you end up with a mix of light and it looks a little bit odd, because if it's just cheap tube lights, you end up with a green or magenta tinge, and it causes all sorts of nightmares in post-production afterwards. So in this case what I've done is I'm using the daylight to create this lovely pool of light on the wall, and you can see it there. You can see the shape of it. It's actually really rather nice. It creates this natural vignette to place the bride in, and then I'm just using two LED panels to illuminate the bride, and the tallest one is obviously illuminating the top part and her face, and that's the brightest light because I want that to be the brightest part of the image. And the one down here is just picking up some details. Otherwise, all of this it would have fallen into shadow, and it would have been a little bit distracting. So this gives me a lovely consistency of lighting down the front of the bride to pick up all the amazing detail in her jewelry and her outfit there. And then it's as simple as that, really. I mean, an image like this doesn't take very long to set up because one light needs to be above the other, one light needs to be brighter than the other, and with continuous lighting you can sort of eyeball it. You can do it by eye, and it makes life a lot easier as well. So again, here are the camera settings. Essentially I'm underexposing the light that's falling onto the wall in the background there, because that that's creating that kind of moody pool, and once that's set then I can literally eyeball the output on the two LED panels, which are set to daylight too, so they kind of match, which is nice. And little tip is when you're looking at continuous lighting, if you can't gauge the balance of the light easily, just squint your eyes a little bit. So when you squint, you can see where the shadows are and you can see where the highlights are as well. And that allows you to gauge, where you need to position the lights, where you need a little bit more strength, when you need to turn it down a little bit, where you can see the shadows and actually model the shadows. Remember, the idea is not to flatten the shadows completely, because shadows are texture and shadows are pretty much essentially part of the image. There's no light without dark, there's no highlight without shadows, and there's no texture without the shadows. So you'll find that I tend to use what we call beauty lighting a lot, where the light that's on the face is usually above the subject. So in this case, you can see it's coming from above the bride, and it's usually about 30 degrees, sometimes 45 degrees. It just depends on the scenario, but usually about 30 degrees, so that we don't cast long shadows under the nose, or long shadows in the eyes, or the nose that you're casting a shadow across the face or anything like that. So about 30 degrees away from the camera, and 30 degrees above the bride as well. So a little bit more behind the scenes. This is actually in Rome for a pre-wedding shoot. So we tend to do a lot of these pre-wedding shoots with our brides and grooms. It's a chance for us to teach them our approach, our skill, teach them my direction, but also teach them how to pose, because the brides and grooms, they love all the beautiful stylized portraits, but they can't see themselves in these shots, and the first thing they say is, I just can't see myself posing, it's just not us. So we use a pre-wedding shoots to show them that they can do it and that it is there, but it's also a chance for them to build their own confidence in being photographed, and also for me to find their limits a little bit, just to see kind of where they are, because some people, they don't like posing at all and they don't really want any of that or much of that, and some couples, they love it, they can't get enough of it and they just want more. So here I can find the limits in terms of just how far I can pose them. Now here, this was a very hot August day in Rome. Lovely couple in this abandoned building, abandoned museum, and you can see there's lots of strong sunlight coming in from the right, but I'm still using flash. The reason I'm doing that is because the bright sunlight would have been too intense on the bride, and it would have made her squint. She would have been pulling faces, and whilst it's easy light at this time of day, it was too much. So I've placed her in the shadows cast by the columns, and I'm filling her with light. So you can see on this, before I begin, that it's again, it's a Profoto B1, and I have a zoom reflector, heavily used zoom reflector, which is gridded. So I tend to use grids rather a lot, because it contains the light and it stops the spill. It doesn't go everywhere, but it kind of sends the light in straight lines almost, and I can focus that light onto the bride. But also the direction of the light there, when it falls onto her, the rest of the light will fall onto an already bright column, so you won't sense that shadow as much. It gives a much softer effect, and it's a more believable effect. So let me just show you that. I need you to work up a really delicate smile. Okay, lips together. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes. And then open. On one, when I count you down, just eyes up toward the camera, okay? All right. 3, 2, 1. No flash, flash, no flash, flash. It's cool. Nice. All right. Okay, and that's the result. So you can see that when she was in shadow originally, it was very heavy on her. So again, I've exposed for all of this bright highlight on the columns, and filling her with flash, underexposing actually the scene first, because those highlights were very, very strong, and then adjusting the flash up to give me this. Now these flashes can deal with that kind of daylight, but actually, at some point you will run out of power, and then you can use distance to bring the lighting a little bit closer. to achieve more output from that. But remember that as you move the light, it has an effect on the shadows. So a very key thing to remember is the closer the light source is to the subject, the softer the shadows. The further away it is, the harder the shadows. And you could try this at home with a torch, just have someone stand in front of a wall, shine a torch on them, and whilst the light output will be weaker and the shadow won't be as dark, the shadow will have a more defined edge. And as you move closer, the highlights become stronger, obviously, because the light's becoming closer, the shadow is becoming darker behind, but the edges of the shadow are becoming softer, more blurred, more fuzzy. So if you want to create beautiful soft lighting, you can use a soft box or some kind of soft diffuser on the light, but have the light quite close, and that will soften the shadows and soften the definition, particularly around the nose and the eye sockets and that sort of thing, if you have the lighting coming off at one direction. So similarly with the groom, now slightly different here, he's wearing black, so I needed to bring out the detail in him a little bit more. So I've got two lights going on here actually, and again I've got a snoot on the groom for his face, and that's going to be quite powerful. It's quite close as well, so it's going to be quite powerful, and it's going to create quite a large highlight on his face and on his outfit. And I'm using the other one just to fill in the details a little bit more in the shadow, so it's not lost. And remember, I'm underexposing the what we call the plate shot first. So the first image is underexposed deliberately for all the highlights and the columns and the environment, which would mean that his outfit is going to look even darker. So I needed to fill that with more light. And you're tilting your head away from me, so just tip it toward me a little bit. Relax the arms a little bit as well. That's it. Just relax them. Bring them in front of you. Okay, that's it.
You look so fit.
Does that mean?
You look so fit. Oh my god.
That's what a husband always wants to hear, isn't it?
Yeah.
I actually really love getting the bride and groom's reactions. So I'm quite keen to show the couple the images on the back of the camera. So growing up shooting with film means that I've just got this habit now of this discipline of trying to get the shot in camera as close as possible without having to retouch out things. And in this case, I know there's a few distractions in the environment around scaffolding and that sort of thing, but I'll try and craft the lighting where the light doesn't need to be in the image and needs to be retouched out afterwards. And I mean, those techniques can actually yield some beautiful results too. But I just don't like spending my time in front of Photoshop, kind of retouching out assistants and light stands and that sort of thing. So here's the result from the groom, and you can see the effect the snoot has had on him, and the other light that had the zoom reflector with the grid actually just lifting those details out there. Placing him closer to the columns as well has given me a little bit of light bouncing off the column onto him, so again he doesn't get lost into that background. If he had taken a few steps back or a few steps in a different direction, if he had taken a step close, sort of in between the columns where the shadows were, he may not have had so much of a reflection. He would have done, because the column's obviously curved and it's sort of bouncing light in all directions. So that's worked really well for me there as well. So again, with the same couple, now posing the two together and using a similar approach to the lighting, but this time using more of the architecture. You can see me getting into precarious positions here and trying to create something very special for them. 2 or 3 inches. That's it. Can I have a pro photo there as well, please? You've got literally 2 minutes before the sun hides behind the... Yeah.
Okay.
Try. I'll go back. A little bit more. Soften. One more time on 1, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, on 1, guys. 3, 2. So you can see the pro photo light just there behind the column. 1, 3, 2. You can see that lovely sunlight just falling through the columns and the effect that's having on them.
I'm gonna cry. No, I might cry. No, I might cry. Is that me?
Oh, cool.
That's. Oh my god, I can't even.
Models, right?
That's
Oh my
Flash,
god,
no
wow.
flash, flash, no flash. So it's always quite useful when the flash doesn't actually recycle because it allows me to have that reference of the effect of the flash. Now, even though there was that lovely sunlight coming in, the architecture is more reflective than their skin and their outfits, so they were slightly underexposed, which is why I had that pro photo behind the column, just to kind of give them a little bit of a lift. But just again exposing for that ambient light, using the lovely warm tones from the sunlight, and then the flash, just picking out the details and making it look like actually it's very natural light coming across from the gaps in the column there. And that's a very simple setup. It's just one light, it's one pro photo, but modified, always modified as much as possible. Now, slightly different scenario. What about nighttime, shooting in the dark? So whilst we were there in Rome, we went out at night because obviously Rome is incredibly busy during the day, and usually around 7, 8 o'clock everyone just goes home and the streets are empty. But we waited until much later just so that we can guarantee it was basically dead. And we went to the Spanish Steps. Now here I'm using continuous lighting because flash would have been too overbearing. And the power output from continuous lights, particularly the ones I'm using here, which are sort of LED Fresnels, which can run off V-Lock batteries, makes life very easy to kind of craft and shape the lighting and sort of set up the scene. So I'll get this video playing and you can see exactly what's happening, but I'm using gels on Fresnel, right, from across there like that, yeah? Closing the couple carefully and you can see the gelled light. So there's a still light just behind me, which is filling the frontal shadows. Yeah, colour management is very important, which is why I always take pictures of these targets.
That is sick. Oh my god, look at that. It doesn't look as awkward as it felt. Oh, that's lovely. Wow, that's lovely.
And that's the finished product there. So that's actually 3 lights. So there was one directly onto them from behind me, and this was just filling in the frontal shadows. And then there was one to the camera right, which is more powerful, which is essentially for the bride. Now, lighting and posing have to work together, obviously. If the pose was slightly different, they would have shadows on both their faces. So shooting from a distance with a 70-200 lens means that you can trick the camera a little bit. In this case, even though he looks like, they're about to engage in a passionate kiss, their faces are actually missing each other so that the shadows don't fall across both their faces. So one would say normally the groom is sacrificed, but in this case, posed this way, he doesn't need to be. So there's light falling onto her face, and there's also another light coming in from camera left for the groom too. But just because of that position and also the light that's behind me is filling in the shadows, he doesn't have awkward shadows on his face. He wouldn't have a stripe of shadow caused by the separation of lighting or by the groom. And also gelling the lights is important because the street lighting there has a very kind of horrid orange greeny tinge because of the type of bulbs that are used there. And again, similar setup from the same series. I've moved one of the lights up here, and I've used a much cooler gel just so that there's a bit of a separation. Otherwise, the tone is too consistent all the way across, and you don't really notice the lovely curvature across her back there if that was the same color. So I've still got the light behind the camera coming straight at her just to fill in the shadows, and the one to the camera right a little bit closer, much stronger, and again, as I said, there's another one up there. So a little bit of triangulation of lighting there, but continuous lighting again just allows you to see what's happening with the shadows, what's happening with the highlights, and it just allows you to gauge these things. So I actually love nighttime photography for that reason, because you're working with a darker environment. It allows you to layer in all of the different sort of levels of light. Essentially, start from nothing and build it up. It's much easier than working with something strong and then having to essentially dogpile on top of that to try and craft the light. So if you're starting out with creative lighting now, start with darker environments and just bring the light in slowly, and then that process. So here's an example of a bright situation, and here I haven't augmented the light with anything. I'm just using that lovely soft light coming in through the blinds. A little bit, but it's also true. Actually, I haven't even told watch this story yet. Okay, with that. Darling, ice to my lens. Relax. Wow. So here's one of the images from that. Lovely soft light, nothing more, just literally exposing for the light on their spot, using spot metering, exposing for the light on their skin, um, bringing the camera nice low down against that marble floor to pick up that reflection as well. But sometimes it's what you don't see that I think adds a little bit of mystery to the image as well. So silhouettes are always very powerful too. And in this situation, we have this kind of long, regular window wall. Why not use that? Why not use the patterns? Why not use the symmetry? Why not use the lines for the framing? Use that lovely reflection on the marble floor to create something very simple. And in this situation, you don't need anything more than the wall behind and the couple, and your camera, of course, and sharp wit. So be able to see this and just simplify. Sometimes simplifying and then building up makes a massive difference as well. So a silhouette usually will work if you have the right form. Now, she was wearing an outfit that was relatively sort of flary, so I had to create some separation, and particularly with a silhouette, creating a separation between the couple is very important. You need to be able to see some air between them so that you can shape the shape. You can shape the silhouette and shape the mood as well. So getting them to step away a little bit more so you can see a gap between them. Otherwise, that silhouette just merges, becomes a black mass, and that's not very enjoyable to look at. It won't make a very good photograph. So creating a little slither of light between them as a bit of separation allows you also to get a sense of the form and their pose and what they look like, connecting their faces, turning their faces toward the camera a little bit more, so it's not full profile, because most people don't actually. A direct profile isn't very flattering, but usually a three-quarter is more flattering, and you can see more of the shape of their face. And this actually allows you to see a little bit. Maybe you can't see it on over Facebook, but actually when you see the photograph, there's some delicate details in there which just lift off. Particularly when this is printed, it would just look stunning. Slightly differently though is going completely the other way and getting more creative. So this venue has this amazing glass floor, which is actually a wine rack. So we put up these black sheets to block out some light, and these were just tablecloths because there were no blinds on the windows, and I needed a dark environment. So remember what I was saying, you start from nothing and you build upwards. So this lighting in the floor, you can't control. There was no way of dimming it or brightening it or anything like that. So I needed to be able to expose for that and just bring in the lighting I needed on top of that. So even though this didn't cut out all the light, it cut out enough that when I underexpose, remember I'm underexposing generally so that I can craft my lighting on top and control the power and control that balance. And it just gave me enough fill to discern the environment around us without necessarily being overpowering or losing it completely. I'm not keen on having large areas of complete darkness in an image. I like to have a little bit of detail, just something for context and for framing as well. And there was also actually just behind her back here was a door. So, but we did have to black that out as much as possible because the light coming in was quite intense, and again, it didn't have blinds on it. It's down, so it's like that. If you lower the knee a little bit, we'll prop both knees up a bit. That's closed.
Face, right? Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Okay, cool. So here I'm literally just using one continuous light that my assistant's holding up here. In this case, I've moved the light lower down so I can light both the bride and the groom without casting awkward shadows on them. Guys. And this is what we get. So this is exposing for the wine rack. And then you can see just there's a little sort of delicate area of information here without it being a complete mass of darkness. And this is just literally one continuous light, nothing more than that. So again, you in the dark, continuous lighting is amazing because you can use very low power lighting. You don't need to blast the whole space with a flash. A flash typically at its lowest power is still too bright unless you're using something like the Canon EL1, which has achieved amazing low levels of power output for actually this exact scenario. So I can't wait to get my hands on that to have a play. It also has continuous light built into it as well, which is good, to different temperatures. But over here, just using one small LED with a Fresnel light on it and barn doors to control the spill essentially, and that's what you have. Something completely different now is a shot I did in Dubai for this couple. So again, this was a pre-wedding shoot, and it's a difficult scenario because we are in the desert. There's sand everywhere. It was actually it was obviously very hot, very warm. Sliding around in the sand. Camels move faster than you think, by the way. And when you're scrambling in the sand and they're coming at you much faster than you expect, it's you're really fighting for the composition, fighting for the moment, and fighting to get the light in the right place as well. So here you think, okay, well, why do I need additional lighting? It's it's Dubai. You've got sand. You've got this relatively overcast sky, so you've got lots of even light everywhere. But remember, the sky is still brighter than everything else, and I'm shooting up at the sky essentially for this shot. So this is how it was done. I have my assistant over here who ran up with actually a bail bulb, in this case unmodified, and it doesn't matter in this case because he's far away enough and he's shooting into open outdoor space, so it's not going to cast awkward shadows, and the shadows would fall into space behind the couple. So the bail bulb flash basically meant that he was able to, first of all, get there quickly, and secondly, shoot at full power and still have enough power to light the couple from that sort of distance. So that's quite a way away when you're shooting in a bright environment like this. You can see from the camera settings just where I was at. I had to really stop down. So I'm at 2/50th of a second, so I'm using the camera sync speed. And the sync speed is important to be able to balance ambient and flash, but also not stretch the flash so much that it's having to use more power than it has, which is obviously not possible. So at 2/50th, I know just kind of where I am in terms of the flash output. The reason I say that is because some of you might be questioning why I didn't use high-speed sync. Well, if you use higher shutter speed, that's going to demand more power from the flash that was already at full power. So this allowed me some adjustability, and I'll explain that adjustability in just a moment. F11, because I wanted detail in the sky. Now you can see from this picture here, it's actually very dull, it's very flat. You might have spotted I have a matte box on the front of my camera here, which has some graduated Lee filters. And I tend to, in these sorts of situations, use either a 0.6 or 0.9 grad, which is darkening the sky. Now, even on a flat day like this, on a flat sky like this, there's actually still texture in the cloud. If you filter it enough, you can extract that detail afterwards in post-production, but actually you can get most of that detail in camera. So if you can see it, you know it's there. If you can see that it's there, then you know you can extract it afterwards in post. And it's really simple as that. So filtering the sky down and just popping a bit of flash to one side, which was really great in sort of picking up this detail of the sand blowing over this dune here. So this is the geeky scientific part, and I won't spend too long on this, but when you're using flash, you have to remember that you're balancing for ambient. So many times I've said I've exposed for the ambient and I've underexposed it, and then I've added the flash. What you need to remember is flash is a burst. The length of time of that burst is fixed. You can't make that flash last any longer. It's one burst, and that's all you can do. All you can do is make the flash weaker or stronger. Okay, that's really all you can do, but the period of time is pretty much the same. And I've just put an arbitrary thing in there of 1,000th of a second. It's probably less than that, actually. Ambient light, like daylight, is continuous. It just goes on until the sun sets. Okay, so right now, at this time of year, we have approximately 12 hours of daylight. So that's 12 hours of ambient light. How you control that is with your shutter speed. So in this situation, let's just say that that is what we call a balanced image. So that creates, say, an image like that, okay, where the flash output and the ambient light is just enough to create a balanced photograph. If what you actually want is an image that looks less flashed, without changing anything else, all you do is turn the power down on the flash. Okay, if you want something that looks more flashed, you turn the power up on the flash. That's the obvious thing, isn't it? But what if you couldn't reach your flash? Or what if you didn't have a remote control for it? Or what if you were already maxed out with the power? Well, then you have to change something else, don't you? If you change your shutter speed so it's a faster shutter speed, you're allowing in less ambient light. So even though the flash output there is exactly the same, by increasing your shutter speed, you're shifting the balance of the flash and the ambient. So the overall exposure, which is the area under that line, under that red line, is the exposure. So here, the area under this red line is much less, so that exposure is less. It's going to be a darker image. You can turn the ISO up to balance that, but you can see the balance between the two shifts. This becomes a little bit more balanced, a little bit more like that, but it's a darker image because it's less area under the red line, because you have less flash and less ambient. If you want it to look even more flashed, you turn up the power on the flash and you have a faster shutter speed. So then it'll look like the environment, the ambient light is, you're shooting in the dark, you're shooting at night, and then you've got this very strong flash. Then you could go on the other way and you say, in fact, what I want is something that looks more ambient with only a little kiss of light. So you have a much longer shutter speed with the same flash output. Or you can turn the flash output down to make it even more subtle. Or you can balance it, so going diagonally across here, these are the balanced images because you've got more ambient light and you've got more flash. So the more flash you use and the more ambient light you have, the brighter the image is going to be. You'd use lower ISO. I hope that makes sense. I don't want to go into that too much, but that's something I sort of go into in more detail with kind of one-to-one training with students and that sort of thing. So here's an example. In fact, I'm going to show you two similar setups, but very different camera settings and flash settings. So this is an image I did in Lake Como. It looks very balanced, very even. The shadows look nice and soft. You can actually see the light on the walls over here on these practical lights. So this is outdoors, and yet you can see that. So it's coming up to quite late in the day. The sun has already set. So we're now the end of golden hour, and it's coming into blue hour. But I'm actually using a flash. So it's a big softbox off to one side, and that's giving me lovely soft shadow because it's so close to the edge of the frame. Actually, the softbox is almost just off the edge of the right hand side of the frame here, but sort of relatively further forward, so the shadows are falling back and away, and that's what's casting the shadows, these soft shadows here. But the output was low enough. And the daylight was balanced enough that you can't really tell. You can't see the shadows. You can't really tell whether it's flashed or not. Slightly different scenario here. Similar setup, similar composition, but actually it's a very bright day. And I'm using a flash which is, whilst in a similar position, different setup. I'm using a beauty dish here which is gridded again so that the light isn't spilling everywhere. but you can see the separation is much harder. Now, what had happened was the sun was setting at this point, and this is the shadow cast by the sun. She was actually in shadow because there was a huge tree in the background casting a shadow on this area. So I needed to use flash to sort of separate the bride out from the environment here. Um, and if you just compare the two camera settings here, look, that's a 60th of a second, so it's actually a lot of ambient light coming in. At f4, so I'm allowing as much light to come in as possible. At 2500 ISO, so it's already quite high at that point. And this obviously doesn't make sense, 1DX 5D. It's just a 1DX, not a 5D. With a 2470. But in this situation, it's 200th of a second, so just below the sync speed of the camera. Remember, what I've done is I've exposed for 250th, and if I come down to 200th, I can allow more ambient light to come in to change the separation between the flash look and the ambient look. 7.1, because it was already quite bright, even though I'm at ISO 200 there. So I'm using the depth of field to overall control the exposure. I know it'll change the depth of field, but that's fine because, you know, I've got all this lovely architectural detail in the background, and there's not really that much more to see behind, so I'm not going to pick up any more distracting elements behind her or in the foreground. This is a fun one, actually, and a very tricky shot. So in this scenario, you have to consider what you can and what you cannot control. Obviously, I cannot control the brightness of the sky, and I cannot control the brightness of the landscape. I can control the illumination in here and the exposure of the whole scene. So just working through this logically, imagine that whole dark room I was talking about and layering in the lighting. You expose for the landscape and then underexpose it slightly, okay? So that you can get as much detail as possible. Well, that means the sky is still going to be rather bright, but you spotted me using filters on my lenses before. Here I've used a graduated filter, quite a heavy one, so that I can pick out the detail. Obviously there's the sun behind the clouds over here. Unfortunately on Facebook it looks a little clipped, but the highlights, there's lots of detail there, which is lovely. And that's the beauty of using graduated filters, actually, because if you're using flash, it means you can use shorter depths of field, and you don't have to use quite so much flash power as well, so you can just change the overall look of the image. So I'm controlling the exposure here by exposing for that, control exposure here by filtering it down, and then what I'm left with is a reflective building and this couple in darkness, because obviously this is the darkest part of the image, this is the brightest, this is kind of the mid-tones. How do I control this? Well, first of all, I have to control the reflection. So not only am I using graduated filter, but I'm using a circular polarizer. And Leaf Filters make a filter holder which has a polarizer on the front, which is fantastic. So you've got the circular polarizer on the front, and you can slide the graduated filters behind it, which is absolutely perfect. That means I can actually shift the reflections around and allow more light transmission through the glass. It won't cut it out completely, because I'm actually shooting through a window in the first place, and then through another window where the couple are. But I still have to pick them out from the dark environment, because you can see up here, this is a double height space. So the exposure up here inside it is what's going on down here. But I've used the flash on them. Now again, the flash is modified. And here's the trick, actually. So this is the room. I'm shooting through a window, and they're behind the other window. And I have my assistant firing a flash through a 7200 lens, backwards through a lens. And the reason is he forgot the modifiers in the car. So we had to improvise and essentially just make something up on the spot. If you fire a flash through a lens, it either magnifies or focuses the light. Okay, just like a camera. So if there was a camera attached to the back of that, the light coming in from the environment would be being focused onto the center. In this case, I'm just having that light come through the lens and focus onto the couple. Great thing is you can zoom it, you can focus it and defocus it, so you can create different effects on there. So have a little bit of fun with that. We all have these modifiers in our camera bags if you have different lenses, and you know, you can get creative and create some fun effects with that too. There's actually a company called Spiffy Gear that makes something called a light blaster, where it's a molded piece where you can mount a flash to the back of it, and it has a mount, so you can get whatever mount you see. If you have Canon lenses, it has a Canon mount. You can mount different Canon lenses onto it, and you can insert gobos and filters and all sorts of different things on there. So that's a lot of fun. Okay, on a wedding day. This is not in India, by the way. This is just Potter's Bar, just outside North London, and this this elevation of the building is actually on the shadow side. The sun has already set behind, so it's quite flat and dark. It's quite overcast on this side over here. So I've had to really craft a lot of light in here. This is actually 3 lights I've used. So there's a Profoto flash sitting on the floor behind them, behind this little behind the balustrade and the portico, lighting up that door, filling in all these details here. And there's 2 lights on the couple. So it looks a little something like this. There's a flash firing through a big umbrella, which is giving you the big soft light across the entire frame. And then there's another modified light with a zoom reflector in the grid, which is separating them. So this light here is actually brighter than that one. Without this, again, they would blend in because the material on the building would have been reflecting more light, would have appeared brighter. So all this thing does is actually just separates them and makes the whole image look quite natural and well balanced. The lighting looks natural and believable, and I think that's a key thing. So again, same venue, different bride, essentially the same setup, and I know it's a setup I can lean on, and it just works for me. So these two lights side by side has kind of become a favorite go-to for me. And I've used a similar sort of situation here as well. She's standing inside this alcove. It's completely dark. I've exposed for the foliage over here, and actually what I've done is exposed for the stonework, and I've got a graduated filter up here, so that kind of brings that down. And then there's 2 lights side by side inside this alcove. So what I have is a zoom reflector with a grid, which is picking out the highlight on her face. And then I have a beauty dish with a grid, because I don't want to light the whole of the inside of the alcove up, because I think that kind of ruins the mood a little bit if suddenly there's a lot of bright light on the inside. I quite like the interplay of, you know, sort of this delicate highlight on the foliage and a delicate light on the stone, and then her face being the brightest part of the image. Similar sort of trick here. This is actually just one bare bulb flash. The bride's standing actually just behind the column, even though from a distance it looks like she's in line with it, but really what I've done is I've just got one speed light, bare bulb speed light, which gives enough, it's close enough to make the light soft, it's bright enough just to give me that delicate balance, and the building is just lit by daylight, and it's as simple as that. Let's not forget the grooms. Sometimes we don't have the most pretty of environments. You know, it's not all destination venues and sort of exotic places. Sometimes it's just hotel rooms in the airport hotel. And this is really all I've done here. It's using the Pro Photos, but actually just using the modeling lights on the Pro Photos. So again, continuous light, and I can see what's going on there. And that's why I've got such a high ISO, and I'm at f4. Again, modify this. You could just about make out 2 lights there. So again, zoom reflector with a grid and beauty dish with a grid as well. So the zoom reflector is picking out the highlight on him here. That's the key light. The beauty dish is giving me that spill on the wall, and also giving me a bit of a rim light around the back of the groom as well. So just kind of wrap around this side over here. The reason I'm getting detail here where I shouldn't be, even though there's no light, is because actually the light's bouncing off the door. So I've offset him close enough to the door for the door to act as a big reflector, and that's just enough detail and separation there, so you can see what's going on, you can see the outfit, but it's all about him and his face. And again, just having a little bit more fun. We're coming up to the end now, but I've got a few more slides to share with you, and there may be some questions coming in as well. But essentially here, this is at night in a car park in Hoxton in London. And we've got Banksy over here. It's not actually Banksy. He may have been, actually. I don't know. Banksy over here doing this thing on the wall. And it was just a derelict space, but it was quite a cool scene. So using a nice soft warm pose with a couple and actually using warm light on them versus a very stark cold sinister character and using stark cold sinister lighting. The way I've done that is I've got a video light on the couple, just warm light, and I've got my car headlights lighting up this chap. So again, expose for the scene, balance the light on the couple, and then use my car headlights to kind of create the sinister. He had no idea I was taking a picture of him, by the way. He kind of turned around and said to me, "Should I get out the way?" And I said, "No, you just carry on doing what you're doing." He didn't realize it was part of the composition. I did show him afterwards. He thought it was quite cool. And sometimes just using window light. I've spoken about window light before. Here, this is using the Canon EOS R and the 50mm 1.2 RF lens. I've just placed the bride next to a window and I'm using that lovely soft light coming in to pick up details on her lashes and her jewelry. Not changing any camera settings, not repositioning the bride, not changing anything else. Once I've adjusted that light through the window, which could just be closing curtains or closing blinds, and that's my modifier. It's just really that simple. And the beauty of continuous light is, particularly through say net curtains or blinds or something like that, is that it's not changeable. Even if the sun's going in and out behind clouds, if you've got net curtains and blinds, it's quite predictable. So you can see this is just in her lounge next to a window, and there's nothing fancier than that going on. And this image was created in the same room in the same scene. We're just facing the other way, and you can actually see the reflection of the window in her eyes, and that's nothing more than that. So I hope that was inspiring. I hope that was useful. If you have any questions, I have the guys from Campkins on my WhatsApp ready to fire them over to me. So it's 11 o'clock now, so that was actually very good timing in terms of the presentation. But if you have any questions, let's hear them. Nothing coming in at the moment. Nothing on the feed. Or is there anything on the feed? Let's have a look here. They've been coming in. What cameras and lenses do I normally use? And have I started switching to mirrorless? Yes. So for many years, and this is from Madingley Cricket Club, many years I've been using the Canon 1DX and 1DX Mark II, 1DX Mark III. Now I am going to the EOS R5. So I have my R5s and lovely lenses. So my typical lenses tend to be, my day starts with the 24 to 70 and the 70 to 200, and then I'll kind of just switch up as the day progresses, and depending on my mood and what I'm creating. So I might switch to a 24 1.4, or I might use the 50 1.2 or the 85, or something like that. But the 70-200 is a very versatile lens, great for portraits, great for the candid shots. 24 to 70, again, very versatile, great for photojournalism, great for portraits as well. But with the R5, my 24 to 70 is essentially being retired, and I'll be using the 28 to 70 f2, which is just the most beautiful lens to use. Incredibly sharp, beautiful bokeh, really creamy images. It's like nothing else I've ever used. It really is my favorite lens of all time. It superseded the 70-200 in terms of my favorite lens. So I hope that answers that one. But some nice comments. Priya saying, beautifully explained, amazing images, thank you very much. Thanks for all the comments that have come in there, and thanks for all of you who've been watching. I can see actually some quite a few people watching here throughout the show. So I hope that's been informative and inspiring, and enjoy the rest of your day. I know there's some more live setup on these pages, so thank you Campkins, thank you Cambridge Photography Week, and thank you Canon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take care everyone.